I certainly can expand on why violence is not the answer is a white and privileged thing to say. This upset some people when I said it quickly the other day. I have written out a script so that I can be careful, and I am more than happy to take you on this journey. I'm going to add this is not going to feel great, but I hope that you can sit with it. Okay, so the idea that violence is never the answer comes from a place of privilege, especially white privilege. It assumes everyone has access to safe, peaceful options for resolving conflict, options many marginalized communities simply don't have. Historically, oppressed groups have had to use force to secure their own survival and rights. Dismissing all forms of violence as illegitimate erases the American Revolution, which itself was violent, anti-colonial uprisings across the global South, like the Mau Mau Rebellion in Kenya or the Haitian Revolution, slave revolts like Nat Turner's Rebellion, and the fight against fascism in World War II. The same people right now saying, why can't we be like Nepal, are the same people that turned around and said, violence is never the answer in regards to what happened recently, right? Where they used violence in Nepal. That's what happened. 20 people died, but they overthrew their prime minister. For white middle-class people, especially those living in stable democracies or what have been somewhat stable democracies until now, this statement is comforting because it protects the worldview. It maintains the illusion that society is fundamentally just and peaceful, and protest will always work if people are good enough. This is like, well, they shouldn't have broken the law if they didn't want the cops to shoot them. Like, no. But for those living under systems of colonialism, white supremacy, apartheid, or occupation, nonviolence is often not a viable option. Another way I've heard this expressed is in cultures where people use their fists often, it's usually because their words are not respected and listened to. I would like to now add to people, since a lot of people listen to me, and I look like a white woman who grew up in a stable democracy, but I didn't. I was born in the Philippines just after the fall of the Marcos regime. I grew up across Asia and Latin America. Grew up in Brazil just after the fall of the military dictatorship. Inside of that, I grew up in a totalitarian cult, the Children of God. I was never exposed to the cult that is America and to the idea of inalienable rights, of freedom of speech, of any of this, right? So as I calmly sit here for you and dictate the cracking up of America, of the culting of America, which I wrote a book on. There we go, which I wrote a book on. I know it feels a little funny to see me doing that calmly, but I've been in places that are much worse. And there has been a lot of privilege in the entire freak out that's going on under the Trump presidency, and it's okay for that to be pointed out and for white people to learn that. You don't actually have a guarantee to living in a stable democracy. That was an American exceptionalism, and that's not necessarily going to be the case anymore. It's probably going to be an unstable democracy for quite a while. And I predict we're going to see a lot more violence. That's what happens when you have huge wealth gaps and homelessness crises, and the fact that we've been alienated from life, no healthcare, liberty, largest prison population, and the general pursuit of happiness, the economy. Okay, as Frantz Fanon wrote in The Wretched of the Earth, violence is sometimes the only way for the oppressed to reclaim their humanity. Similarly, Martin Luther King Jr., often sanitized by white people as a purely nonviolent figure, acknowledged that riots are the language of the unheard. And Malcolm X also talked about how it is not violence when it is self-defense, when it is a response to oppression. There's a couple of historical examples and scholars of color that I would like to point out, which is Frantz Fanon, who has explored the necessity of violence in anti-colonial struggles. The Wretched of the Earth is that book. Angela Davis has critiqued state violence and the false neutrality of nonviolence, including with regards to prisons in America. Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz documented indigenous resistance to the US settler colonialism. We're going to be digging into her book soon on this channel. Malcolm X argued for self-defense and pointed out the hypocrisy of a nation founded on violence, condemning the oppressed for using it. And Audre Lorde highlighted how silence in the face of oppression only serves the oppressor. And this brings me to another topic, which is it's really would be hypocritical of me to say violence is never the answer, because I am a former soldier who went to Afghanistan twice, which brings me to the hypocrisy of any Americans saying violence is never the answer, because our country was founded through violence and has literally been violent all throughout our history. Many Americans that I served with, we were all taught we were bringing peace, but in reality, military violence was normalized. And this is an even deeper conversation about who gets to use violence and power, right? Whole bunch of people out there saying violence is never the answer who have not had that same reaction to police violence, right? So this is kind of all of the different realities that we need to look at. One more scholar of color I like to highlight is White Woman Whisperer, who I do a lot of work with. She is a great Patreon where she goes into all of the nuances of this kind of stuff on a daily basis. She and I have a podcast together called Hey White Women, where she is pretty much educating me as I deconstruct the delusion of white supremacy and helping me understand all of this stuff. And she has been featured in The Culting of America as well. So check that out. Pre-orders are live, attached here. I'm not going to argue with folks about this topic, but I hope we can have some good conversations in the comments.